And thank you to Sangfor for inviting me here. What a great location. It has been far, far too long since I was in Bali, so it's wonderful to be back here. I hope you're all enjoying your stay and you're able to enjoy the location as much as I plan to. So as Dion said, my name is Michael Barnes. I'm Vice President and Research Director with Forrester for Asia Pacific. What I'd like to talk to you about today is future fit IT, and in particular, how you can enable a future fit IT strategy within your organizations. And in fact, what future fit actually is. But before I do that, let me start by setting the context. So our world has changed. We all know this. Market dynamics have fundamentally disrupted business in some very significant ways. For one, think about the topic of business resiliency. 3 years ago, this was a security and risk discussion. It was around business continuity and disaster recovery. And then, as organizations, we were faced with massive supply chain disruptions. That's followed by the war in Ukraine and disruptions to access to natural gas and oil for many organizations, in fact, many nations. That's been followed by an increased frequency of natural disasters throughout the world. Business resiliency is now a board-level discussion, and that has implications for all of us as organizations in terms of our technology strategy. At the same time, as a result of the pandemic, our customers' values have changed, and they increasingly expect the brands that they engage to share their values and follow through on the brand promises that they make. A third area of disruption is the reality of hybrid work. That is now the current state for just about all of us as organizations, and we'll be moving forward. And finally, there's the issue and the opportunity, I would say, around hybrid experiences. Think about your organizations 3+ years ago and where digital fit for you. You enabled your customers to engage with you typically through traditional physical channels or through digital channels, but in most cases, those experiences weren't actually consistent. That's no longer feasible. Customers expect a fully hybrid experience. They expect to engage with the brands they engage with in the manner that is most convenient for them. And the experience needs to be consistent across whatever channel or access point is most convenient for those customers. So that's the business reality. So let's talk about the tech challenge, because there is a challenge here. So think about all of us as organizations. For over a decade now, the percentage of spending on technology has increased as a percent of gross domestic product. So we've continuously increased our spending on technology, but we have not seen increases in productivity. Spending's increased, the benefits have not. That's an issue, and that needs to be dealt with. So why is that? Well, one, what the pandemic did was expose the brittle nature, the inflexible nature of many of our core systems and core infrastructure. It's also highlighted the massive amount of technical debt that is keeping organizations from truly innovating. And then there's the growing level and frequency of cybersecurity risks that need to be dealt with. But here's the thing, despite these challenges, there are still organizations that are thriving. How are they doing? 2 words, customer obsession. Organizations thrive when they are able to put the customer at the center of their total operating model. What does that mean? That means using customer and customer value as the guiding light for all of your strategy. but also all of your operations. And that's only possible if business leadership is also on board and fully embracing of a customer-obsessed approach. And this isn't merely words. Customer-obsessed firms simply perform better. You see the numbers behind me here. Customer-obsessed firms, based on Forrester's global analysis, perform 2.5 times better in terms of revenue growth, in terms of profitability growth, customer retention, and last but not least, and perhaps in many cases most important in the world we now live in, employee engagement. They simply do better. And what's interesting is there is a direct link between becoming customer obsessed and becoming future fit from an IT standpoint. There is a direct connection in terms of the path to maturity towards customer obsession. So if you think about the majority of organizations, the IT function is still traditional in that the focus is on improving process efficiency, primarily with a focus on cost reduction. There's absolutely an embrace of cloud-based platforms, but typically for migrating existing workloads and implementing some new workloads in a structured approach, meaning there's still a significant amount of waterfall-based production. And ultimately, these organizations are order takers. They are taking orders, requests from the business. Contrast that to a modern IT organization that is far more responsive and in fact, in many cases, enabling the business, embracing things like DevOps and more continuous delivery and flexible delivery, focused not on cost reduction, but on value delivery, and identifying and defining that value in the customer's terms. And then there is the small but growing percent of future fit organizations. What's the difference between modern IT and future fit? Future fit organizations partner with the business. There is joint accountability for the common goal of the organization, which is delivering brand value to your customers. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about future fit. So the easiest way to define future fit is to identify the characteristics or the capabilities that ultimately represent future fit. The first of these being adaptivity, the ability of the organization to modify, to change, to augment, or extend business structures and capabilities in response to current and future customer or market needs. The second one is resilience. And quite simply, resilience in business terms is your ability to deliver on your product vision or your brand promise no matter what. That's it. That's how it's thought of from the customer standpoint, and that's the way we as technology and business professionals need to think of it. And the third area is particularly interesting because it's not something we often talk about within the context of IT, and that's creativity. What do I mean by creativity? It's the ability of the tech function to understand, to appreciate customer value, customer expectations, and to deliver on that using technology. It's investing in prioritizing in technology, emerging platforms with a core focus on what's most important, which is delivering customer value. And as with customer obsession, it's not just words. Future fit organizations simply perform better. Our research shows that future fit organizations grow revenue 1.8 times more than their peers. And how do they do it? Well, what I'd like to do in the time that I have left is drill down into how future fit organizations actually deliver business results, deliver consistent customer value. And they do it based on 3 distinct drivers. The first, as you can see here, is platforms. The second one is practices. And the third is partners. So I want to spend a few minutes and talk about each of these and put these into a context so you can understand how organizations are evolving towards being future fit. So the first one, when we talk about platforms, what we're talking about specifically is the ability of organizations to deliver time to value or reduce time to value, and to do it in a consistent and increasingly flexible way. So contrast the way most organizations have traditionally thought of their systems. It's on the left. The old model is a silo. It's a stack of suites from infrastructure, underlying networking and servers, through to your applications, whether it's core ERP systems, CRM systems, other operational systems, and then services on top of those. That's not the world that Wilson articulated. That's not the world that Sangfor supports. We are increasingly in a cloud-centric world, and that model no longer applies. What does apply is the understanding that we all are embracing various platforms, whether it's our hyperscale cloud providers, or our software as a service partners, or professional services firms, or other industry consortiums. These are all platforms that we as organizations can leverage. And the common thread among them all, of course, they are cloud-based. Cloud is the core to this entire scenario. So let's come back to the 3 characteristics of future fit, because they apply directly to cloud. In terms of adaptive, the key with cloud is accessibility, cost-effective and timely. So employees can access services in days or weeks instead of months or years. Developers can access instances or services they require to innovate, to experiment, to try new things, and they can quickly shut down those services once they're finished. At the same time, cloud providers themselves are continuously updating their platforms, providing their customers with access to latest capabilities, features, and functions. And then as far as creativity, that developer access to clouds gives different functions the ability to experiment, to innovate. So marketing can test a campaign in a cost-effective manner with easy access to compute capacity. Or you can test new products or test initiatives in particular regions and do that cost-effectively. And finally, there's resilience. The fact is, as organizations, by embracing cloud, we are embracing both outsourcing, just partnering with other firms on our platforms, and embracing automation as a key focus for us as organizations in order to better prioritize where value is, which is the capabilities, the services, the experiences that touch our customers. And it goes even further than that. Cloud native takes us to a whole new level. The ability to leverage new patterns, new architectures, whether it's microservices, serverless capabilities, makes it far more feasible and effective to re-architect traditional monolithic systems, to move those systems, to break them down into more modular pieces. From a process standpoint, cloud, and particularly cloud native, makes things like DevOps far more feasible by supporting it within the core platform itself. Things like continuous integration, continuous delivery, become tool sets to enable that capability within the organization. And finally, from a platform perspective, you get new infrastructure through cloud native, leveraging things like containers and virtual machines and serverless, but also far more effectively being able to implement a hybrid approach that meets your particular business needs, whether that's off-premise, on-premise, some type of hybrid scenario between the two, and all sorts of relationships, because that's the reality of the platform model. It will be flexible. So let me give you some examples of that. So in terms of platforms, I'm going to talk about Standard Chartered, global bank that was facing some challenges. So this is back in 2015. Frankly, they had stagnant growth and they needed to do something about it. They responded by appointing a new CEO. One of the first things that CEO did was hire a new CIO. One of the first things that CIO did was embark on a path towards future fit IT. It started with embracing a cloud-first strategy, but not for the sake of cloud, not for something as basic and potentially unrealistic as cost savings or efficiencies, but as a way to deliver improved value to the business through better value to Standard Chartered's customers. So, for instance, in terms of adaptive, during the course of this journey, what Standard Chartered has done is reduce the time from idea to production down to 10 weeks. The goal is to average 6 to 8 weeks from initial idea or concept through to production for a banking product or banking service. In terms of creativity, they've pursued new ways to grow and to penetrate or to serve markets, including right here in Indonesia with Nexus, the banking as a platform service that they launched and created in order to partner with other in-country digital platforms and provide that capability through a more flexible partner model. And then finally, resiliency based on their ability as a global organization with significant operations across the Middle East, Asia Pacific, Africa, is to deal with different regulations, different requirements around data residency, different requirements in terms of the banking regulations that they had to deal with, dealing with different types of natural disasters, for instance, by embracing a cloud-based approach as opposed to physical data centers in all of those locations, which simply wasn't feasible. Okay, so that's platforms. Let's talk a bit about practices. Because with practices, what we're talking about really is, again, the ability to align your various initiatives, your various teams with outcomes. So I'm going to touch on two specific practices because they align very well to what Sangfor covers and what we heard from Wilson earlier. So the first, just to set the scene, think about the implications of what I just talked about. We're in a cloud-based world. That means we as organizations are embracing platforms. That means the future looks very different, and some of our traditional assumptions no longer apply. For instance, by embracing cloud, which is critical to business success, your attack surface grows exponentially. That's just the reality. It's not just about your existing IT environment or even shadow IT. You need to think about the web, mobile apps, social apps, third parties that you're working through. Those all become a factor. It's no longer just about managing or protecting the apps on your network. In fact, we can't even assume that the access is only through your network. The focus needs to be much broader. And the last point, ultimately, what does this mean? Everything needs to have an identity. We need to think in terms of people, but also devices and the scenario, the hosting model, the channels. These all become factors. What this leads us to inevitably is zero trust as an information security model. Why? Because zero trust is designed for the world that we now live in, a world where we cannot simply build bigger walls. We cannot assume that all traffic on our network is secure at all times. So we adopt a posture that has three basic assumptions to it. One, all entities are untrusted by default. What that means quite specifically is they require an identity, and you need to be able to check that identity, and that is the basis for access to core data, core systems. It's not simply based on the fact that it's on your network, but it's based on your understanding what that identity is. The second one is least privileged access is, again, the default. So, as a general policy, providing as little access to core data as is necessary for an individual, an employee, or a process to actually function. And in instances where more access is required for a transaction, it's provided for the life of that transaction. Once the transaction is complete, access reverts back to least privileged. And the third area is the ability to support comprehensive monitoring as part of it. So a way to think about it is the ability to effectively shine a light on the dark crevices of your organization, the areas where nefarious actors are likely to hide, and be able to expose that. Now, as far as uptake of zero trust, it's a work in progress, but it is increasing. Here's the results of a study we did across Asia Pacific of security professionals. I believe it was over 900 security professionals in region. Zero trust is not yet a top priority, but it is trending that way. And it's based in large part on an understanding that it is the best model to cope with and thrive in the world we now live in. The second practice that I wanted to touch on is around managed security services and the MSSP market more broadly. What we're seeing is an interesting dynamic in this market. So there's a set of capabilities, which you can see there, that are typically included in an MSSP platform. Perimeter network security, application security, endpoint security, identity and access management. That's the core capabilities. But what we've seen is, as this market matures, it's less about a comparison of features and functions, because all major MSSP providers have these core capabilities. What's the distinction and how are organizations making a decision? It's based on relationships. So the number here, as you can see, 34% of the organizations that we surveyed are actively considering a change in MSSP. Why is that? Because they need someone who will partner with them, who is flexible, who has access to the talent that they require, and is able to build and maintain trust with that organization. All right, so let's provide an example of some of the practices I'm talking about. In this case, this is Sportsbet. They're an Australian online wagering platform. They enable bets online, essentially. And they, through their investments in a future fit strategy, have increased market share. They are by far the most dominant player now in the market in Australia, with over 50% market share in this highly lucrative space. And how do they do that? Well, it starts off with a sharp focus on prioritizing what's important to their customers. So that means embracing DevOps and increasingly NoOps where they can, identifying repeatable processes, automating them, and ultimately, if possible, eliminating them entirely. That's the focus. Why? So they can shift their energy to being creative. So as an example, these folks live in a world of instant gratification. That's what gamblers want. That's what their customers want. So they created what they call a generosity engine and did it very quickly on their platform, where they were able to drop the time of payout from 16 minutes to 16 seconds, which for their customers is a massive improvement and creates a level of stickiness, of return visits and loyalty. And finally, resilience. So Sportsbet's actually owned by a larger entity called Flutter that does other things, including, in this case, a platform for auto traders, buying and selling vehicles. Because of their platform approach, they're able to leverage much of their capabilities across different businesses they own, different scenarios entirely, but with some common features. Okay, so the last area, let me talk a little bit about partners and what we're seeing happen in this space, because the reality is how we engage with partners in the cloud-based world really does change pretty dramatically. I talked about the dynamics for MSSP, for managed security service providers, and the fact that the relationship is far more important than the underlying capabilities. They need to be there, but trust and reliability are what ultimately determine success and customer attention in those spaces. Well, it's somewhat similar when it comes to partners overall. What we're seeing is a focus shifting towards innovation through partner ecosystems. It's understanding that when you commit to a hyperscale cloud provider, for instance, that is a strategic partnership. When you commit to a SaaS application or to a professional services provided platform in a particular industry, that is a partnership. And you need to think about it in terms of that partnership and in terms of value delivery and who's responsible for that value delivery. So I'm going to come back to Standard Chartered as an example of what I'm talking about. So they, as part of their journey to Future Fit, have adopted different approaches. Traditional joint ventures, certainly, but still things like risk sharing constructs as well as a way to be adaptive to different opportunities. And one example of that is the SC Ventures. They created a separate group specifically responsible for identifying opportunities in the fast-paced world of banking, to work with fintechs, for instance, work with digital platforms, and find ways to jointly innovate towards common value. And what's interesting in terms of monitoring these relationships and also ensuring availability of these services, they've taken a much more focused approach. This is where things like cloud native capabilities and standard platforms and partner view all come together. So instead of having vague terms of the partnership, vague understanding of what the actual joint value or the outcome of the partnership is, they take a much more technology-focused approach, down to the level of even monitoring number of API calls between, say, their platform and the partner's platform, because that is a leading indicator of whether there's any real customer uptake and whether that volume is there. So, okay, let me leave you with a couple of thoughts here. From a big picture standpoint, what we've identified at Forrester is really 10 competencies that future fit firms do better than their peers. And I believe we're going to share this deck with you because I know some of this might be a bit hard to read. I'm only going to touch on three that I think are most critical. The first one is around culture or adaptivity. Embrace a culture of constant change. We are all in a world of digital transformation, digital capabilities, digital reality. The challenge is how we can operate at the speed of digital as traditional organizations. And the truth is we can't. We need to adapt. We need to change. Technology helps drive that change, and in some cases actually accelerates that change. but it ultimately begins and ends with culture. It's about leadership, understanding what the focus needs to be. And the focus needs to be around customers and customer obsession. And the tech function needs to understand that and be directly connected in the technology choices that we make to that core value, to that customer understanding, so that each and every decision we make, each and every investment we make, each priority we make is aligned to that common focus. The second one on creativity is increasing the time for employees to innovate. And I'll go further. It's not just about carving out time, it's about empowering employees to innovate, giving more employees access to cloud services is a starting point, but there needs to be that culture of learning, that culture of being able to identify opportunities because the firm is all aligned to the common goal, which is delivering improved customer value. And the last one around resiliency is promoting this notion of resiliency throughout the firm. It's no longer a security and risk topic around business continuity or disaster recovery. It's around what I said earlier, the ability of the organization and everyone who's a part of the organization to ensure that we can deliver on our product vision and our brand promise no matter what. So that is the end of my presentation. I want to thank again Sangfor for inviting me here today.